Okay, let's finish this off, shall we? First, we're going to go through and pick up all the scenes that we missed up to this point. So Akita, when we pointed out before, was Virus. The day Ukita became a Q member, Ukita asks the other Q member about the history of Q. Back when Ukita had been contacted by the man from Q.
Q はかつてテロ組織ではなかった。単なる善意の市民団体だったのだ。その頃我々は世に訴えかけた。人に心を読まれたくない。そう思うのは当然の権利のはずだと。
That was what he told Ukita. At the time, Ukita took little notice about that tidbit, but in hindsight he found it concerning. It appears Q was operating as a citizen group back in the day, which means the name Q was known to the world back then? So the organization called Q already existed when the Great Rokume City arson occurred. Ukita had been 19 at the time, but he'd never heard of any group or organization with that name. So when Ukita tried asking the man from Q about it the next day,
存在していたと言えるし、存在していなかったとも言えるな。
he got that answer.
というと
その頃、我々は別の組織名を名乗って、Q と名乗り始めたのは、六名士同時多発火災からかなり経った後だ。以前話したように、我々は六名士同時多発火災の後、無実の罪で逮捕された。異様なまでのスピード裁判、そして3年間の獄中生活。塀の外に出てきた時には、社会がすっかり様変わりしていた。生まれ育ったふるさとには都市ゲートが築かれ、前科持ちの我々は六名士に入ることさえ許されなくなっていた。我々はただ言うべきことを主張しただけなのにな。
その時点では君たちに非はない。
そうだ。故に我らは無実を訴えるため再び組織を結成した。しかし六名士の為政者たちは我々の想像以上に狡猾だった。我々の団体が再結成されたのを知るや、それをも治安維持のために利用しようとしたんだよ。国内で起こる様々な BC 絡みの事件、それらは全て我々のせいにされた。
何？なぜそんなことを？
その方が治安維持のために都合がいいからさ。為政者は我々に Q、すなわち不明のものなどという名前を付け、ありもしないテロ組織をでっち上げ、捏造した常識を社会に定着させたんだ。いわくコミュニケーターを憎む悪の組織が日本には存在します。彼らは六名士同時多発火災を起こした最悪のテロリストたちです。コミュニケーターはかわいそうな被害者でも政令指定機密都市に来れば安全に暮らせますよ。そんな耳当てのいい言葉を誰もが受け入れた。つまり我々は公共の治安のための生贄にされたのさ。
Here's the thing. They genuinely believe that they were scapegoated, and yet inadvertently they were the cause of it.
わかるかね。これが我らが組織の誕生の経緯だ。
And yet, Rokume City did genuinely cover up the true cause of it. And ultimately did scapegoat them for it.
敵が我々をテロ組織だというのなら、その嘘を真実に変えてやる。
Those words made Ukita shudder in fear. I can understand why he feels that way, but still. Regardless of the reasons behind Q and Okita's methods, they were still acts of terrorism at the end of the day. Even if their opinions fell on deaf ears otherwise, resorting to acts of destruction was far too removed from the rules of society. The society that Q hated so much, in other words, Rokume City, had also fallen far off the beaten track from those rules. Just how long will this chain of malice continue? He felt something was wrong with Q's opinion. That said, he didn't know who was in the right. No, maybe nobody's in the right here. That's the most sensible thing you've said this entire game, Okita. He suddenly remembered a passage from a book he had read as a child. He who looks upon everyone as monsters soon becomes the real monster himself. And who is the monster? A? Q? The Rokume City government? Or me? It's me. I'm the monster. Didn't really learn anything new from that, but it was just more Ukita getting information that we learned from other perspectives. Still interesting, though. Ultimately cements in our minds the opinion that we've had all this time, which is that both sides did some really shitty things. Say, whatever good intentions either side had at the start, they both became the monster in the end. To use the logic in this scenario. Mashiro. Yeah, ironically, these are the two scenes in Mashiro's side that we have yet to see. Camouflage City. After Natsuhiko heard Mashiro's story about the terrorist, but refused to take her seriously, Mashiro begins to look for the terrorist alone. The night of September 13th. Mashiro tried to tell Natsuhiko about how she heard a terrorist's voice on the bus, but he wouldn't take her seriously. Mashiro felt both sad and incredibly angry at that fact.
そっか。本当に変わっちゃったんだね、夏彦。そんなに安全が好きならずっと家にいれば。もう夏彦には頼らないよ。じゃあね。
おい、ちょっと待てよ、真城。
Mashiro ran out of the Tenkawa residence while ignoring Natsuhiko's calls to stop. And thus Mashiro began to investigate by herself. Next morning, as a light rain fell, Mashiro skipped school and headed for the city gates. She thought that if she couldn't get Natsuhiko to believe her, then she might as well look for the terrorists by herself. As she waited for the bus to take her to the city gate, Mashiro thought to herself, "Damn it, Natsuhiko, I always listen to everything that you have to say. How's about returning the favor? Normally you're supposed to jump to a beautiful girl's rescue when she's in fear, right?" Her anger from the previous night still hadn't subsided. Her irritation towards Natsuhiko set free the dissatisfaction she usually suppressed. Besides, I think Natsuhiko's looking down on me a bit too. I thought I'm like the perfect woman, if I do say so myself. I'm so cute and cheerful and gentle, and I'm even good at cooking too. Even at the equivalent of ability level 5. That's top class in all Japan. Still, that Natsuhiko, he's just taking advantage of how we're childhood friends. Never does a thing to take it a step further. Now that it had come to this, she had no choice but to find the terrorist herself and make Natsuhiko admit he was wrong. Even if Natsuhiko kneels down and growls before me, I'm still not going to let him off the hook. How should I punish him? Oh, I'll know. I'll make Natsuhiko serve me as a butler for an entire day. He'll have to prepare black tea, pull out chairs for me, and pamper me all day. Natsuhiko in a butler suit, huh? Oh, that's so great. So moe.
って違う。趣旨から外れてる。
Yeah, slight distraction. Mashiro's train of thought derailed that far before she quickly pulled herself back together. Right, I'm searching for terrorists now. I shouldn't let my time waiting for the bus go to waste. First I gotta gather some information. Mashiro took out her PDA and connected to the internet. She already done a simple preliminary investigation yesterday. What terrorist organization could be lurking around the city? was probably the largest domestic anti-BC organization, Q.
まあネットの情報なんてあんま当てにならないかもだけどね。
Correct. As Marshall muttered that, she looked up a site that compiled information relating to Q. There were several interesting articles. Q's first incident. September 16th, 2018. A newly established BC research facility in Sarabetsu, Hokkaido was blown up by some entity. Several days after that incident, Sarabetsu City Hall received a threatening letter. "We shall punish those who support communicators." That was all that was written. This letter was simply signed with the letter Q. It was the first time that the organization named Q entered the history books. It's not sure when exactly Q was formed. Several aspects about the organization remain a mystery, such as their goal, or how their members assemble. One theory states that Q was once the extremist group that caused the Great Rokume City arson of 2014. The name of that group was the Anti-BC League. At the time, they vehemently hated communicators, which resulted in them setting fire to a city where communicators lived. The Anti-BC League members were arrested as the culprits behind the Great Arson, but the possibility remains that the members reorganized after their release. Perhaps at that time they renamed themselves Q. That thought in mind, you might say Q had already been formed by 2014. Strangely enough, that was the same year as the Grand Communicator discovery. BC's emergence in history was accompanied by the terrorist organization Q. Communicator and non-communicator alike must beware them. The idea of Japan as a peaceful country detached from terrorism may already be just an illusion of the past. Mashita finished reading that article and muttered to herself.
その団体の名は反 BC 連盟。反 BC 連盟のメンバーは同時多発火災の犯人として逮捕された。
After they were released, they changed their name and continued their activities all over Japan, it seemed. And now, 16 years after the Great Arson, they had descended upon this city once again to cause another incident. Why do they hate communicators so much? The man on the bus yesterday even mentioned putting an end to this town's history. Mashito couldn't understand that line of thought at all, but it's still kind of scary. The fear she felt yesterday came back. I'm so afraid Natsuhiko won't come save me, will he? Stupid Natsuhiko. You're so useless. Heartless, even. Mashito forcefully drove away her fear, using her anger towards Natsuhiko as a distraction. Right around that time, the bus arrived.
来た来た。よーし、夏彦のことなんか忘れて正義の旅に出発だ。一人ぼっちだけどね。
Tee. Mashito muttered to herself in a lonely voice before boarding the bus. And finally, in a corner of this world, a memory of not too long ago, a thought collected itself in Mashito's mind ever since she learned Yuri was alive. A short time after Natsuhiko had called for Kazumi through the PDA, but before she arrived, Mashito looked at Natsuhiko and Yuri and secretly thought to herself, such a bad girl. Her best friend, whom she hadn't seen in 9 years, was right in front of her, almost snuggling up next to Natsuhiko. Mashito sighed softly enough that nobody would notice. Got such a pitch-black mind. I'm the complete opposite of my name. The name Mashito was given to her by her mother, who had wanted to raise a girl as pure as the color white. But Mashito was now tormented by the feelings her mother had placed into her name. Mashito was surprised from the bottom of her heart to have learned that Yuri was alive. Her surprise soon turned into happiness. But even so, for a split second, she had another thought. If Yuri's alive, and I don't have a chance, she's going to take Natsuhiko away. She had thought that even though Yuri was a precious friend to her, even though Yuri had gone to Lebo instead of her, and wasted 9 years of her life. I'm the worst. Those lives and livelihoods are at stake here, and I had the audacity to think about love. Even if it was just for just a second, she really could not forgive herself for feeling bitter about her best friend's survival. Now that she had learned of Yuri's devotion and love, she couldn't just ignore it. There was no possible way for her to ignore Yuri's feelings and enjoy her own romance with Natsuhiko. I guess I really should back out then. Watch over the two of them like I always have. Oh. Once Mashiro had that thought, Yuri glanced her way.
どうしたのマシロ？なんでもないよ。立花さん遅いなって思ってただけ。
She tried to smooth things over and look away, but she still felt Yuri's gaze upon her. Please don't look, Yuri. The last person I can reveal these feelings to. With that thought in mind, she tried to close her heart, but then Yuri's voice echoed in her head.
マシロ、ひょっとして私にヒコリンを取られるって思ったの？
Oh? Mashiro gasped and asked back with telepathy.
ユーリ、まさか私の心読んだの？違うよ、読んでない。ただ私がマシロンだったら同じことを思うだろうから、私も身を引こうって思ってたから。
Noticing the sorrow in Yuri's expression, Mashiro bit her lip. Yuri looked at Mashiro and continued.
でもマシロン、私たちそれじゃダメだよ。誰かのためになら自分は損をしてもいいって考えてばかりいたらダメなんだよ。どうして？ユーリだって夏彦のために自分の人生を犠牲にしたじゃない。だからだよマシロン、私ね、自分が損をしてもみんなが幸せになればいいって思って生きてきたの。でも今日少しずつ気づき始めたんだ。そのやり方じゃ結局失うものもたくさんあるって。マシロンだってずっとヒコリンのことが好きだったんでしょ？その思いを捨てちゃうの？そんなの私嬉しくないよ。
By stepping out, by removing yourself, making sacrifices, taking yourself out of the equation for what you believe is the happiness of others, you're underestimating your role in their lives and your place in their hearts. And how much that would hurt them if you weren't there. Mashiro's chest tightened as she heard Yuri's mental voice. Mashiro knew. Yuri wasn't just saying that to be nice. She was really thinking about Mashiro from the bottom of her heart. It was true. If Mashiro backed out now, she would have wasted 9 years of her life thinking about Natsuhiko. If I backed out, would Yuri be able to have a proper romance with Natsuhiko? Of course not. Just a minute ago, Mashiro was thinking about how she wouldn't have been able to either. But how far apart they were, but how different their environments were, Mashiro and Yuri had still lived with similar thoughts. If either of them backed out, it would cause tension between them and fundamentally change how they could act around Natsuhiko. In the end, it could leave everyone unhappy. And for everyone to be happy, Mashiro looked at Yuri and sent her telepathy. She mustered up the courage to give her near-decade-long friend a decisive declaration.
ねえ、ユーリ。何？だったら正々堂々戦おうよ。夏彦を取り合ってさ。
It was Mashiro's first clear declaration of rivalry with Yuri. Yuri's face shined at the sound of those words.
でも戦うって言ってもマシロンに勝てる気はしないけど。それは私も一緒だよ。そう？そりゃそうだよ。だってユーリ初めて会った時も言ったけど、ユーリめちゃくちゃ可愛いんだよ。
No.
お人形さんみたいで、しかもすっごく優しくて、ずっと私の憧れだったんだから。
Yuri's face turned bright red at those words.
ありがとう、マシロン。じゃあ私、自信持って頑張るね。 そうそう、それでよろしい。
Two of them smiled at each other. Then they glanced at Natsuhiko as he stared at the surveillance monitor.
やれやれ、なんでこの程度の男をさ、こんな美少女2人が取り合ったりしなきゃならないんだろうね。本当だね。まあ、あいつだけじゃいまいち頼りないし、みんなで脱出するまで私たちが力を貸してあげようか。じゃあ脱出まで一時休戦だね。いいよ、共同戦線だよ、ユーリ。
An alliance. Mashito answered Yuri with a smile. Mashito felt the darkness filling her mind quietly dissipate. She realized that she had been waiting forever for this day. The day she could find herself in the cliched, yet healthy, youthful situation of fighting with the friend she loved over the boy they both loved. And she was sure that if she gave it her very best, without holding back for her best friend, that even if her love were to crumble, it would crumble without a single regret.
ねえユーリ、ありがとね。私、ユーリの友達でよかったよ。
With those final words, their time had been frozen for 9 years, began to move once again. Aww. I still think it should be a tie between them. They both deserve. Anyways, Enna, confirming, is Captain Kasasagi a terrorist? Every time that doubt plays in Enna's head, anxiety continues to sway her heart. After she had seen Kuroda, Higa, and Dojima's corpses, Enna began to harbor the doubt that the rescue squad could be terrorists. That doubt inevitably led her to doubt those around her as well. What about Kazumi? What about Jun? What about Captain Kasasagi? Is he a terrorist? That question eventually became the most pressing issue within Enna. Then when she came across Salyu in Area 2, that doubt deepened instantaneously.
エナ、夏彦に免じて一つだけ忠告してあげる。あの隊長という男には気をつけて。あの男は危険。
Right after that, Watase appeared, shouting.
おい、それはどういう意味だ。
Exactly the thing a non-dangerous man would do.
待ちなさい、サナミさん。
Sally ran away without listening to Enna when she tried to stop her. After they had lost her, Enna and Watase looked at each other and spoke.
しかし、あの子、俺が危険ってどういうことなんだ。
そんなこと言ってたわね。隊長さん、さっきの話に心当たりは？
残念ながらない。
そう。
She looked at Watase's face and thought to herself. Judging by Miss Sanamiya's tone of voice and what the kids told me yesterday, I would make Captain Kasasagi the terrorist. There's something about that conclusion that I don't agree with. At first, Enna had found him suspicious as well. If his amnesia were a lie, then he'd clearly be up to no good. But if his amnesia were real, then there was a high possibility that somebody had erased his memory. She could think of two reasons somebody would erase it. The first possibility was that Watase really was a terrorist, and someone with good intentions erased his memory to nullify him as a threat. The other possibility was that a test subject happened to come across Watase, and erased his memory to escape the facility. Hopefully it's the latter. That was what Enna hoped. For regardless of what the true Watase's nature was, the current Watase was at least an extraordinarily desirable man. Uh-oh. He had the courage to leap into blazing fire, poisonous gas, and high contamination to save complete strangers. He had the kindness to risk his own life to protect those in danger. Anna didn't want to believe that the Watase she knew was only a temporary personality born from his memory loss. So afterwards, when everyone's trust began to get strained, Anna gave Watase a warning.
いい？隊長さん。 周囲のあらゆるものを疑ってかかりなさい。周りの人もこの施設のことも、場合によっては自分自身の見聞きしたものも先入観に騙されてるかもしれないから。気を抜いたら重要なことを見落としてしまうかもしれないわ。命に関わるようなことをね。
She thought that unless she told him that, he might fall into someone's trap. Watase had a tendency to believe others too easily. That would normally be a virtue, but it was an invitation for danger in these circumstances. However, Watase looked Anna back in the eye and responded.
そうだな。信じれば騙されるかもしれないしな。それでも俺は先生のことを信じるよ。
え？
リスク抜きの真偽なんて嘘っぱちだろ。自分だけ安全なところにいて信じるだの信じないだの、そんなのは何の力も持たない言葉だ。だからこれからも先生が疑われれば無条件に信じるしカバー。きっと先生の親父さんもそうするはずだよ。
Eh? Those words impressed Anna. Those were the thoughts of a soft-hearted person who paid no heed to human malice whatsoever. However, she suddenly recalled her father's words. The most important thing humans have is the ability to trust. Perhaps Watase would stick to that conviction just like her father had. Anna had somewhat started to realize that possibility. Captain Kasasagi isn't a terrorist, but a righteous rescue worker, then Watase seemed like he could be the most reliable partner for Anna at this point. I'll open up my heart. My true heart that I've never opened up to anybody. Anna looked at Watase's face and secretly swore that to herself. Unfortunately, he was already spoken for. God, yeah, that was a recurring theme of this, wasn't it? It's not a daddy issue thing. It just so happens that I'm interested in the same qualities that my father had. Let's just move on to Sally, shall we? It does make sense, though, why she came to trust him as much as she did. Even when the truth came out, she still kind of came back around to him after seeing that there was still some of his good qualities showing. Anyway, Salyu. Looking for... Salyu's actions. After the, after True End. And before encountering Watase again in Double. Kazumi shook Salyu off, knocking her out at the bottom of the stairs. Salyu then dreams of an unknown day in the far-off past. It was a memory of just a few hours ago. Salyu held Kazumi's neck tight in her grip to force Watase to release Natsuhiko. At that moment, Kazumi screamed and violently shook Salyu off of her. Salyu's body was sent flying backwards. He then landed on the staircase. The impact jolted her chest and her consciousness quickly faded. Salyu fainted as if she had fallen asleep. In the short time she was asleep, she had a dream. A dream of some unknown, faraway past. Someone was speaking in the corner of a coal laboratory.
これがコミュニケーター A の娘か。
適正度は皆無。NBC の影響は確認できずです。
Oh my god. For some reason, Sally could not move her body. She seemed to be lying down in some sort of bed, but she couldn't get up. She couldn't even talk. Is this baby Sally? All she could do was listen to someone's conversation.
もっとも A の体内にいるうちに悪意に感染している可能性はありますが、
大事を取って処理するのは妥当でしょうね。
何を言っているの？あなたたちここのところずっとおかしいわよ。超真剣にいた頃はもっと倫理観が。
あなたには分かりませんよ、天川博士。同時多発火災の夜、あなたは超真剣にいなかった。N 化したコミュニケーターへと対峙していない。だから彼女の恐ろしさもわからないのです。彼女はおそらくテレパシーでもエンパシーでもない第三の能力を持っていました。頭の中を直接まさぐられ書き換えられていくような感覚、あなたにわかりますか？その恐怖が。
I have to admit, as bad as their ethics what got, if their initial actions in Labo were based off of that fear, you gotta admit that's a terrifying thing. To just be around someone and all of a sudden your memories are different. Not even knowing that Senses Sympathy is a thing. All of a sudden, she's using BC on you and your memories change. And you're, what the fuck just happened? It's gotta be a terrifying feeling. Experiencing it without knowing what the hell it is.
私はそれまでコミュニケーターを守るべき対象だと思っていました。しかしあの夜、その考えは180度変わったのです。あれは守るべき対象なんかじゃない。紛れもなく人愛の力を持つ怪物だった。その娘に対しても私は恐怖を抑えることができないのですよ。
入口さん、あなた。
何ですか？
But using that fear as justification for the stuff that you're about to do in the history of Labo makes you no worse than Q. In fact, probably worse in some ways. Actively worse.
ただとにかく私はこの子を処理することを認められない。
ならばどうするというのです？無論この娘を外の世界に出すことは断じて認められませんよ。
私の責任のもとにここで育てるわ。
That was when Sally awoke. What a strange dream. It was truly a dreamlike, unbelievable scene. Because her dream took place in Labo's neuroscience laboratory. I went there for the first time today. It's already in my dreams. Nevertheless, it was a somewhat frightening dream. Sally took a deep breath and stood up. Then began to drag her staggering body once more, in search of Natsuhiko. She had finally reunited with Natsuhiko, only for him to disappear somewhere again. Terrorist probably has him. No matter how much she searched and searched for Mashiro, she couldn't find her. It suggested that she had safely escaped before lockdown. At least that was what Sally wanted to believe. Anyway, I need to look for Natsuhiko. Because it's my duty to protect him. She had decided to do anything to fulfill that duty. Which is why, when she had discovered 20 ampules of AD in that neuroscience laboratory. Oh! She took the AD and hid it in the supply closet for the girls' restroom. Oh shit. He thought she'd quickly distribute the AD to Natsuhiko and Mashiro once she found them. There's a letter written by Enna by the AD, but Sally tore it up since she couldn't trust her. Maybe I'm doing something cruel. Those guys in the orange suits are probably all terrorists. If Okita's the sleeper agent, there's a high probability that Enna's with the terrorists too. Sally had no chance of winning against such superior numbers. She had no choice but to gamble on the effects of radiation weakening the enemy. Eventually, Sally found an axe by the corpse of a terrorist. I could finally launch a counterattack with this. Even with that weapon, she was no match for Watase. She decided that next time they crossed paths, she would do whatever it took to defeat him and save Natsuhiko. Perhaps the terrorist didn't intend to kill Natsuhiko. It was for certain that Natsuhiko was heavily injured. That's why I can never forgive that man. there's no way I can break my promise to protect Natsuhiko. I promise with the only thing supporting the lonely Sally, pushing her forward. My only question... My first thought is... the timing in that scene. Because she had to have found the axe before. Okay, in the timeline of before, Watase goes to Area N to put out the fires, finds no fires, finds Natsuhiko, is attacked by Sally with the fire axe. So Sally found the fire axe beforehand. Sally was subdued by Watase, and then later on, in the true end path of that before, Sally stumbles upon Watase and Kazumi again. Okay, the way the end of that scene was written out, it was just recounting what she had done up to that point. So, pretty much confirms Sally stole the AD, which is a long-standing mystery finally put to rest. Then Sally found the fire axe and stole that. Then went to Subject N, found Natsuhiko, found Watase, attacked Watase, was subdued. Later on, encountered Kazumi and Watase, was thrown down the stairs, passed out and had that dream, which is what planted the thought in her, I think, that there was something up with her memories. Very interesting. Also, fuck those guys at Lave, honestly. They did some horrible shit. Even if I can understand the fear of initial first contact with Senses Sympathy, using it to justify doing awful shit down the line makes you no worse than... pretty much confirms what we knew already, that both sides of this conflict are awful, have done awful things. But I'm not getting back into that again. That's done that plenty, far too much. You're probably more than tired of it by now. I don't blame you. Love is the plan is death. An hour ago, as she worries over Natsuhiko and the other's safety, Sally finds herself thinking about Natsuhiko for some reason. It's a memory of just about an hour ago. Sally chased after Watase into a connecting passageway. Watase had broken the security gate's card slot to stop her from pursuing him. Watase shouted to Sally on the other side of the closing gate. In the split second, she stopped in surprise. The gate shut, separating Sally from Watase. Ah. She stood still in front of the closed gate. They're searching for me, so they're safe. Why would that man tell me that? What's his goal? She could find no answers. She tried to keep pursuing Watase for the time being, but her feet began to stagger. At the end of this nearly 10-hour battle, her fatigue finally caught up with her. There's no way I can stop here. That man's words were a trap, and Natsuhiko's in danger, and I need to go save him. That thought in mind, Sally retraced her steps. As she walked down the long passage, she recalled her memories of Natsuhiko. At first he was terribly unkind, and they failed at introducing themselves to each other. But next day he praised her casual clothes, and the distance between them shortened just a little. They looked up to the night sky together and talked about the stars. They told each other about themselves in the karaoke box. When Natsuhiko looked at Sally, Alice made a sound she had never heard from her before. Sally looked at Alice in disbelief. Nothing.
別に。
本当に？
本当に。
Are you sure about that? Sally didn't press him any further. According to Alice, the emotion Natsuhiko displayed at the time was romantic feelings, otherwise, a proportionate fondness. Natsuhiko has romantic feelings. For me? Preposterous, there's no reason he would. But what if he really does? The more she thought about it, the more frightened she became. But it was a happy moment. It was also a moment that pained her heart. So Sally decided not to think about it anymore. But she still wondered. Was she really fighting for Natsuhiko's sake just because he was an important friend to her? Was she really only fighting to fulfill her duty? No. That wasn't how she felt. It was a very tough realization for Sally to make. She couldn't understand other people's feelings. So if she were to start harboring such emotions, it was all too easy to imagine a sad ending awaiting her. Regardless, that doesn't mean I'll change my action in the slightest. After all, Natsuhiko had once told Sally this.
他人の心がわからなくても努力し続けるのが、つまりは人を思いやるってことで、それはきっと自分のためにも他人のためにもなることでさ。
That was why Sally didn't mind struggling for his sake. There's only one thing I'm sure of. It's that Natsuhiko definitely doesn't want to die. So I'm fighting for his sake because... it was the only thing Sally could think of that was certainly right throughout her life of fumbling her way forward in the darkness. My feelings don't matter right now. I just have to work hard for Natsuhiko and Mashiro, so that they could all survive together. That certainly explains her epilogue. That certainly explains her epilogue. I'm of the mind to believe that Natsuhiko, to his whole friend group, has always had strong platonic affection for all of them. Yuri, Mashiro, and swiftly Sally too. In the events of the Afterrout. I don't remember the exact contents of that scene in question, but I could see him sitting up for a moment and going, "Oh no, that's cute." Giving off that impression. Let's see, I don't remember how old... They're in high school, so... She's still 13, 14 though, so... Moving on. I'm just going to not comment on that. Okay, I'll comment one more thing about that. She's certainly... first time she's ever experienced anything like that, so... was kind of interesting seeing the thought process, dealing with that sort of thing for the first time. Okay, what is next? Jun and Yuri. That's about it. Why don't you take a short break and we'll come back and finish them. We're about 40 minutes in. And we're back, ready to resume. We have Jun and Yuri to go, as far as cleaning up scenes that we haven't seen before. And then it's on to finish Natsuhiko. So first, Honky Tonk Woman. Jun's first day of work as a rescue worker. She meets a man with a sour face and harsh tongue at the fire department. After passing the rescue worker exam through sheer guts and spirit, Jun finally fulfilled her dream of joining Sirius after half a year of waiting for her transfer. As such, she was moved from the Rokame City Eastern Fire Department to the Central Fire Department. Then her first day of work arrived, one which Jun faced with high hopes. This is where SIS works, the front line for rescue workers. She wasn't only happy about getting to wear the uniform she'd admired for years. She was also excited about the prospect of finally meeting him, too. Maybe the hero who saved me when I was a kid is still there. Her memory of her savior was faint since it had been 9 years, but she felt she'd recognize him as soon as she saw him. I wonder if he'll remember me. I'd like to thank him once at least. She then entered the station with those thoughts in mind. Immediately came across a fellow rescue worker. Jun saluted and greeted him. It was supposed to have been the perfect greeting. The worker didn't respond no matter how long Jun waited.
こいつまで女だてらに。
Jun was taken aback by how suddenly he clicked his tongue.
こいつまでとはどういうことでありますか？
なんでもねえよ、こっちの話だ。
では、女だてらにとは？
この命がけの仕事をわざわざやろうとする酔狂な女がこれで二人になっちまったってことだよ。まあいい、入隊すれば女も男もない。これからたっぷりしごいてやるから覚悟しとけ。
The man left with those words. His other opinion aside, the second part of that sentiment is certainly valid. Once you enlist, no man or woman, you're just a rescue worker. You better work yourself to the bone. Utterly stunned by what just happened, all Jun could do was watch him walk off in the distance.
なんだいあいつ。
A voice called out to Jun from behind right after she let that curse slip through.
ジュン、何一人で騒いでるの？
あ、お姉ちゃん。ねえ、なんなのあの人。初対面でいきなり女だてらにとか言われたよ。あたしそういうこと言われんの大っ嫌いなんだけど。
あの人って？
目つきの悪い隊員だよ。こんなトカゲみたいな目をしたさ。
Yeah.
トカゲ。ジュン、多分その人はあなたが配属される私たちの隊の隊長、笠崎渡瀬消防司令補よ。
え？
隊長、前々からこぼしてたから。シリウス A チーム5名のうち2名が女になるって。人事は何考えてんだって。
女性蔑視だな。そんなやつが私の上司になるなんて。
ジュン、そんなやつとは何ですか？口を慎みなさい。
でもな。
Jun started pouting like a kid from her dissatisfaction. Kasumi's face stiffened up at that moment.
ジュン、あなたには今のうちに言っておきます。まず、職場で私をお姉ちゃんと呼ぶのはやめなさい。
え？
これから私はあなたの上司になります。けじめをつけるため、橘消防士長もしくは副隊長と呼ぶように。
そんな急に言われてもこれまでずっと。
黙りなさい。それと私は職場では敬語を話します。あなたに対しても敬語を使うのでそのつもりで。
あ、本当に敬語だ。
Yeah, yep.
もうお姉ちゃんったら硬いんだから。
Welcome to the big leagues.
わかりましたか？
Though Kasumi was not often prone to anger, Jun knew that there was nothing scarier than an enraged Kasumi. Thus, Jun clicked her heels and gave a salute before that storm of indignation could burst free.
失礼しました副隊長
And thus Jun's life as a rescue worker unfolded. Though he always sounded full of himself, Watase's skills were next to none on the field. Jun had passed both Firefighting Academy and the Rescue Worker exam at the top of her class and had been treated as a real up-and-comer by the Eastern Fire Department, but she was nowhere near Watase's league. Armed with his physical abilities, level-headed judgment, and vast wealth of experience, all of which far exceeded Jun's, he truly was an ideal rescue worker. Not bad, I guess. She couldn't stand his utter indifference, but she quickly grew to have faith in his skills. With Watase, Kazumi, and Hyama's cool heads bounced out by Dojima's and Jun's wild personalities, the five of them made a great team. It's almost like Human Resources had that in mind when they assigned me. Yeah. That's what they were thinking, Watase. At first she wasn't sure about the whole deal, but her days at Sirius weren't so bad after all. There was one thing that kept bugging her. Where is that guy? Jun had been looking around the fire department to see if the rescue worker who'd saved her was there, but no one knew who she was talking about. Even Kazumi was the same. All she had to say on the subject was, "Who knows? Why don't you try asking the captain?" After Jun finally mustered up her courage and asked him, Watase simply said, "Hell if I know," and left it at that. Well, I guess I'm glad it's not the captain, but still. At any rate, it had already been over 9 years since that day. It wouldn't be surprising if he'd transferred or something. So I guess that means my hero's no longer here, huh? Jun was a little disappointed that she couldn't show that man just how much she'd grown. Little did she know. Little did she know. Okay, next up. 3 days ago, when Jun was providing the local disaster prevention guidance, she had a surprise encounter with some familiar faces. 3 days ago, Jun had been visiting Public Institute after Public Institute for disaster prevention guidance purposes. One of those stops included Rokume Academy, where she was stopped by some students.
もしかしてこの間のどこかであったっけいやほらあの時の事故現場であの事故の時通報してくれた子たちだね
Those kids were Natsuhiko, Mashiro, and Louise. They appeared to look up to Jun. Jun was also a bit happy about that, so when they asked her why she became a rescue worker to begin with, she answered honestly.
私さヒーローになりたかったんだよね
ヒーロー？
いや私ってば子供の頃からなんつうか男勝りでね誰かに助けられるヒロインより誰かを助けるヒーローになりたいって思っててさヒーローの定義とかって難しいけど人の命を救うってのは間違いなく正しいことだしね
However, Jun was thinking something else then, too. I guess I do have another motive. It was also to get back at my old man. Jun's father, a city council member, was still as arrogant now as he had been when Jun was a child. He was a total snob who still spat on the justice Jun believed in, nothing like the heroes Jun admired. As a councilman of a city that had garnered much influence over the years, he'd probably done several things that skirted on the edge of illegality. Jun had tried to gain his attention when she was a kid, but she more or less gave up by the time she had entered middle school. In high school, she frequently left the house to hang out at Kazumi's place instead. Once she graduated, she left home for good. Jun was currently living by herself in a small apartment she rented. Well, he lived his own way and I lived mine. We're both adults now, after all. Of course, whatever her father did had nothing to do with her. She figured she'd just live doing what she felt was right. Once she parted ways with Natsuhiko and his friends, Jun headed for her next destination, the PRC. Oh. She then took care of her disaster prevention guidance there and was about to head on back. when she spotted a familiar face in an office. Oh? Oh crap. Daddy! June frantically hid behind a door. She hadn't seen her father in the 2 years since she had left home. What's Daddy doing at the PRC? It looked like her father was talking to the PRC's chief.
ここのところの災害の頻発、どうも人為的なものを感じますな。
では、やはり連中の仕業だと。
可能性としてですが、しかし仮にそうだとすると、9年前の再来、関係各位に注意を促しては。
バカな。どう説明するというのだ。
情報の開示をするべきでしょう。いい機会ではないですか。
情報開示だと。そんなことをしたところで市民の不安を煽るだけだ。匿名誌に Q が入り込んだなどということを断じて認めるわけにはいかん。あれから十数年もかけてようやく現在の平穏が築かれたのだ。真実を明かせば全てが台無しになる。
Ah, yes, the tried and true stick our heads in the sand and pretend everything's fine strategy.
今回も内々に処理するのだ。いいな。
The chief grew quiet. What are they talking about? Nothing they said made any sense to her. There had always been a part of her father that had been shrouded in mystery for many years. After all, he was the man who'd ignored the citizens' protests and carried out the setup of cameras all over the city and strengthened the city gate regulations. Oh. Well, it's got nothing to do with me. I don't mind letting sleeping dogs lie. Jun left the building with that thought. Again, another scene that we haven't seen before, but just kind of supplementary information. Just fleshing out the world just that little bit more. So, Jun's father, prominent politician who led the charge in big brothering the shit out of Rokame City. After the Rokame City arson. And now, he's all up in the idea of, we can't admit anything's wrong. Maintaining public order by admitting it. By hiding the fact that there's shit going wrong. Which is not good, but like it doesn't fix the problem. It incentivizes Q to do more nasty shit. On to Yuri now. Let's see. Start out with the past, and then we head here. So I won't forget. A few days after Yuri ran away from home with Natsuhiko, at the park she learns of the emotions imbued within Natsuhiko's watch. It was a nostalgic memory of long, long ago. Memory of a time shortly after Yuri and Natsuhiko had run away from home. The night they ran away from home, Natsuhiko explained Yuri's family situation to Dr. Tenkawa. After she had heard everything, the professor spoke to Yuri.
安心なさい、ユリちゃん。必ず状況を改善してあげるから。
Yuri wanted to believe in those kind words. Afterwards, the professor indeed stuck to her words and worked here and there for Yuri's sake. According to the professor, she was apparently working with the people at the Child Consultation Center at the Department of Social Welfare, One day the professor brought several men with her to Yuri's house and they discussed something with her parents. The professor told Yuri that things might drag on until evening, so go play with Natsuhiko for a while. So Yuri waited with Natsuhiko for the adults to finish talking. Two of them talked as they sat on a park bench.
夏彦くんのお母さん、やっぱり優しいね。私のためにお仕事休んで頑張ってくれてるんだもん。
うん、頭良くてかっこいいだけじゃなかったね。
As a result of Dr. Tenkawa's efforts, Yuri felt that her family situation had improved. She even felt that her parents were yelling at her less.
それに、夏彦くんのお母さんって強いんだね。うちのお父さんすごく怖いのに負けずにガミガミ怒鳴ってたもんね。
うん、あんなに怒ってるお母さん見たことなかったよ。
When Dr. Tenkawa first arrived at the Kotono residence, she was like an ogre, to the point where Yuri was frightened, even though she was the one the professor was protecting.
でもね、うちのお父さんが言うには、お母さんも弱いところがあるんだって。だから僕が守ってあげなきゃダメなんだって。
It was then that Yuri first realized that Natsuhiko hadn't mentioned his father up until that point.
ねえ夏彦くん、夏彦くんのお父さんってどんな人なの？やっぱりお父さんも優しいのかな？
Natsuhiko fell silent at Yuri's question for a second, but then he replied with a smile.
うん、優しくて強くてかっこよかったよ。いっつも元気で明るくてね。
Oh.
お母さんと僕によく大好きだって言ってた。僕もお父さん大好きだったよ。
Yuri furrowed her eyebrows at his words. He sounded like he was talking about his father as if he were gone.
そういえば夏彦くんのお父さんって見たことないけど、お父さんどこにいるの？
天国。
お？
去年病気で死んじゃったんだ。
ごめんね。
As Yuri frantically apologized, Natsuhiko just smiled in reply.
気にしないで。僕、お父さんと同じで強いから。もう泣かないってお父さんと約束したからさ。
Natsuhiko then showed Yuri his left hand. On his wrist was a wristwatch that looked quite out of place on a child.
これは？
お父さんの時計だよ。この時計をもらった時、手紙も一緒にもらったんだ。それに書いてあった。辛くても泣かないで、自分より弱い人を守れって。
じゃあ私を守るって言ってくれたのもお父さんと約束したから？
うん。今回はお母さんに助けてもらっちゃったけど。
Yeah, same difference.
でも、いつかはちゃんと。
Correct. Natsuhiko muttered as he looked at his watch. The adult-sized watch was still too big for his arm. Yuri had the feeling that one day he'd grow into it and make it look good. Eventually, Natsuhiko looked at Yuri and spoke.
ねえ、ユーリ、もう5時半だよ。きっと話し合いが終わる頃だよ。そろそろ家に帰ってみようか。
でも
大丈夫。怖くないよ。僕がついてるから。
Yuri mustered up the courage to answer. And then they walked to her house hand in hand. 10 years have already passed since then. Even now, Yuri remembers that day whenever she sees his watch. Natsuhiko was probably really sad about his father's death, but he still encouraged Yuri. That kindness made her happier than anything else could. It was probably around that time that Yuri fell in love with Natsuhiko. Oh. Her memory of this faraway day still remains a treasure in her mind. Like I said countless times before, between Mashiro and Natsuhiko, neither of them deserved to lose. Let all three of them be happy together. Wonder if that's also the rationale behind the trigger point in going to the past and back to the present was Natsuhiko's watch. Wonder if part of that is a bit to remind him of the strength he showed that day to Yuri. Since the whole thing was Yuri attempting to help Natsuhiko realize his own strength and overcome her phantom and get his time moving again. Wonder if that's just a bit of bonus symbolism in there with that watch, as it was utilized in the before route. But again, that's just me rambling. Day before the incident, Yuri receives a lecture from Dr. Tenkawa about the experiment to take place the next day. This should be interesting. It was last night. Yuri and Dr. Tenkawa were discussing the plans for the next day, that is September 16th.
博士、明日の予定なんですけど。
何？
明日6時半から18時半まで N エリアで実験って
それはね、元はといえば私が昔からずっとやりたかった実験なんだけど、急遽今やる必要が出てきたので、ゆりちゃんに手伝ってほしいのよ。
今やる必要？
ゆいがラボを出て被験体の数が減ってしまったじゃない。それでも高度な実験が行えるということをラボの上層部に証明しなければならないの。
わかりました。もちろんお手伝いします。でもどんな実験なんでしょう？
そうね、わかりやすく言うと意識を作る実験かしら。
While Yuri blinked in confusion, the professor continued with a straight face.
ゆりちゃん知ってる？意識の発生過程ってね、現代の科学ではまだよく分かっていないのよ。
そうなんですか？
論理的に見て脳のどこかに意識が生じているように見えるでしょ。でも脳をどんなに細かく分解していっても意識が生まれるメカニズムはわからない。ただのタンパク質の塊になぜ意識が生じるのか、意識のありかはどこなのか。
それを探る実験なんですか？
違うの。私なりに見つけたその答えを検証するための実験よ。
I mean, that makes sense. It'd be kind of weird to just conduct a science experiment to just say, let's fuck around and make a consciousness. You'd logically be doing an actual experiment to test a theory, instead of just fuck around and find out. But that fuck around and find out in the broadest sense of the term, instead of fuck around with a theory and find out if it works. The professor smiled boldly.
さてゆりちゃん、意識の発生過程を探る前に知っておかなければならないことがあるわよね。ねえ、意識って何だと思う？
意識ですか？懐かしいですね。思ったり感じたりする心、魂って呼ばれるものでしょうか？
魂ね、それも一つの答えだわ。様々な答えがある哲学的な命題だけど、少なくとも私はこう思うの。意識とは情報の集積とその変容、そしてその変容の仕方を自ら取捨選択できるということよ。
取捨選択？
それが重要なの。ただの情報と意識を分ける決定的な一線。
Making decisions.
情報をいくら集めたところでそこに意識は生まれないわよね。例えば 大容量のハードディスクがあってもそれが意思を持つことはない。そこに記録されている情報は変容しないから。ではそれが変容するとしたらどうかしら。いいえ、これだけではまだ意識とは呼べない。ハードディスクの内容を1000回書き換えたところでそれは他者が行ったこと。意識とは全く別物よ。コンピュータープログラムもしかり、決められた処理を行うだけで自ら何か選ぶわけではない。だけどもしその情報が自らの変容の仕方を取捨選択できるとしたら、それはもはやただの記録媒体じゃない。人間の脳内で起こる作用と変わりないわ。そこには意識が生まれたと言っても過言ではないと思うの。
なるほど、私もそう思いますけど、それを作るっていうのはどういう意味ですか？
Accumulation of information capable of making decisions about its own transformations. Nuri asked that question. The professor pointed at her own head.
人間の脳の中には高エネルギーの BC 粒子が満ちているわ。それはいわば情報エネルギーの集合体。脳から作用を受け常に変容していく。逆に BC 粒子も脳に作用を及ぼし印象や感覚を変容させる。つまり脳内の BC 粒子とは脳と相互に影響を及ぼし続ける。それってさっきゆうりちゃんが言ったものに似てない？
Everything she said suddenly snapped together in Yuri's mind.
魂？
そう。魂なんてものが実在するとしたら、それは脳内に満ちる BC 粒子のことなんじゃないかって思うのよ。太古から人類が存在を示唆し探し続けてきたもの。その正体は素粒子が伝播する情報エネルギーの集積だった。つまり魂は概念なんかじゃない。物理的に存在したのよ。そこに長年謎だった意識のありかがあると思うの。つまり意識は脳に発生するものではない。脳はただの記憶媒体であり演算処理装置。それを包み込む情報エネルギーの集積、すなわち魂にこそ意識が発生するの。魂に生じた意識は脳を使ってその結果脳が得た答えや刺激は意識にフィードバックされ魂に記憶や経験として書き加えられる。
Huh. Brain's the hard disk. Consciousness is formed by the information energy inhabiting it and interacting with it. So the brain would be the warehouse. The consciousness would be the workers, the forklift drivers, moving information from place to place, bringing it in, storing it, picking it up, sending it out, processing it, so to speak.
それを科学的に証明できたら衝撃的じゃないかしら。
The professor smiled faintly. It was not the motherly smile Yuri was used to seeing from her, but rather the smile of a pure child.
チャ
がなくても意識は存在しうるんですか？脳の外に高エネルギーの BC 粒子の塊ができれば、それは魂になるんですか？
勘がいいわね、ゆうりちゃん。それを確認するのが明日の実験よ。明日やることはこう。
Miyoko began talking about the particulars of the experiment.
まず N エリアに500ミリスカラーバリュー前後の WX 粒子力場を発生させ、その状態を保つ。だけど WX 粒子には何の情報も載っていない。それだけじゃただのエネルギーの塊が N エリアに現れるに過ぎない。そこでゆうりちゃんに N エリアに入ってもらって BC を使い続けてもらう。
BC って誰に対してですか？
誰に対してでもない。無差別テレパシーでいいわ。ゆうりちゃんが発信した情報エネルギーは絶縁体に阻まれ N エリアの外には出ていかない。それでもなおゆうりちゃんは延々とテレパシーを発信し N エリアの情報エネルギー量を高めていく。ゆうりちゃんの頭の中の全記憶を全て情報エネルギーとして発信するつもりでやるの。
何のためにそんなことを？
私が確かめたいのは、つまりこういうことよ。ゆうりちゃんの脳内の全情報エネルギーを BC によって N エリアに放出した場合、そこにはゆうりちゃんの魂がもう一つできるのか。
Yuri was speechless. Professor's words were logical and consistent. The sheer scale of what they were doing came as a surprise.
もっともそうすることで何が起きるのかはわからない。それでも生まれるのは単なる情報エネルギーの塊に過ぎないかもしれない。あるいはその場にいる人間、例えば私やゆうりちゃんの脳と相互作用を及ぼし変容していくかもしれない。さらにはその変容の仕方を取捨選択できるようになり、いずれ自我を燃えて自らその場にいる人間に干渉するかもしれない。もしそうなったらそれはまさに意識の発生、魂の誕生に他ならないわ。
私の魂がもう一つ生まれるって、なんか怖いです。
心配しないで。粒子増幅器を止めてエネルギー量が減衰すればその魂も消えるはずだから。
それも寂しいかも。
困った子ね。いいじゃないの、協力してよ。これは私の悲願なんだから。
悲願？
The professor looked down with distant eyes once Yuri asked that.
この魂は作れるのかっていう仮説は、私が16年前に書いた情報力場仮説という論文の中からさらに展開した説なの。この宇宙には重力、電磁力、弱い力、強い力の4種類の力の他に情報という第5の力が存在する。そして人間の精神活動も情報の一種ならば、情報エネルギーの集合体が意識を持つこともあり得るのではないか。いわば自我を持った情報エネルギーのフィールド、自我情報力場が発生するのでは。若い頃の私はそう思ったのよ。当時は証明のしようがなかったけどね。でもあれから長い年月が経ち、WX 粒子増幅器の性能も向上した。長時間にわたり危険性の薄い500ミリスカラーバリュー程度のエネルギーを保ち続けることができるようになった。そして不正室のコミュニケーターであるゆうりちゃん、その2つが揃うことでようやく実験できるようになったのよ。だからたまにはいいじゃない。寿命延長の研究でもない、 BC の解明でもない、自分がしたい実験をしても宇宙の真理に触れることができるのかもしれないのよ。 科学者の魂がやるべきって言ってるの。
The professor tapered her lips in a pout. Yuri felt that the professor was acting different from usual in several ways.
博士、何かあったんですか？
昼間夏彦に怒鳴られたの。ちょっと泣いちゃったわよ。うちに帰ってこない親の言うことなんか聞けるかですって。私はいつもあの子のために頑張ってるのにちっとも伝わらない。
ヒコリン、ひどい。わかりました。実験でも何でも付き合います。
I mean, he was right.
いつでも博士の味方ですからね。
Let's not forget that from his perspective, he's perfectly justified. As much as I've taken her side on things and understood her point of view, and we can't forget that from his perspective at that time, he had a point. Maybe went too far, but
ありがとう、ゆりちゃん。ゆいが手を離れた今、私の味方はあなただけよ。
the professor hugged Yuri tightly. Yuri suddenly realized something as those arms remained wrapped around her.
でも、博士、ちょっと思ったんですけど。
何？
明日の実験の時には N エリアには500ミリスカラーバリューの WX 粒子の力場が発生するんですよね。じゃあ私が BC を使うまでは N エリアには空っぽの魂があるってことになるんですか？
まあ無理やり例えるとそうなるかもね。空っぽの魂を魂と呼べるかは疑問だけど、要は記憶も意識も持たないエネルギーの塊がそこに漂ってるだけよ。
その空っぽの魂に私が情報エネルギーを注ぎ込むことで意識が生まれる。ここに何か重要な秘密が隠れてる気がするんですけど。
あら、物理学に興味が出てきた？はい、
私博士の娘ですから。
可愛いこと言うじゃない。
Yuri chuckled as the professor playfully nudged her forehead.
まあそれについても明日の実験でわかるかもしれないわ。
I'm sure nothing will go wrong.
それに備えて早く寝ましょう。
As Yuri answered thusly, she completely forgot about that secret. It wasn't until long after that she had remembered. When she began walking around Labo after meeting Watase and Kazumi. The two of them were talking in front of the gate leading to Area N.
なんとか N エリアに入って火災を止められないかな。
何言ってるんですか。それは危険すぎます。
Oh?
たとえ鎮火することができたとしても致死的被爆は免れないでしょう。
そうか。くそ。
Then Watase brought his Procyon close to the gate. Only for the reading to start shooting up astronomically.
2406ミリシーベルトだと。
一気に1000近くも。
危険です。お下がりください。
The group frantically ran away from the door. Just then the Procyon's readings went back to normal.
ゲート越しでもこんなありさまかよ。
鉛などでできたゲートであれば放射線は完全に遮断できるはずなのですが、周囲の壁や天井などに破損部があるのかもしれませんね。
When Yuri heard that, she secretly thought to herself. The WX particles in Area N are crossing through the BC insulators and are slowly leaking out. Does that mean that the empty spirit is leaking out of Area N and drifting about inside Labo? WX particles over 1000 milliscalar value currently spreading throughout the facility. So perhaps they were all walking around inside of the empty spirit. What happens if we do that? The spirit exerts some sort of influence on us? If Yuri used BC, then it was natural to assume that the empty spirit would receive the information energy as well. In which case a consciousness would be born. No, it wouldn't be that easy, would it? The experiment was supposed to have taken hours. Besides, it wasn't conceivable that a consciousness born like that could help her in any way. After all, it would just be a copy of Yuri's spirit. Once Yuri had thought about all that, Kazumi spoke up.
隊長、ともかくこれで内周島の捜索は終わりです。外周島を手伝いましょう。
That's right, I should be worrying about surviving rather than trivial things like that. That thought in mind, Yuri decided to stop thinking about the empty spirit. Oh. That explanation took a lot out of me. I'm going to take another break. We're going to come back and finish Natsuhiko. It's just wondering how much of this, the empty spirit plotline was in the original. The original where this deep dive into everyone's memories was the climactic Seek a Way Out segment. Would be curious to know, anyone who knows of the original game, the original Xbox version, original release. How did this scene play out? How did this segment play out in terms of figuring out a plan to get out of the building? To get out of Labo? Because maybe they just restructured it to be a plot supplementing thing, but plot supplementing thing involving the empty spirit and the consciousness that took hold of it, which is probably I don't know how I feel about that plotline overall. But yeah, I'd be curious to know how this segment originally played out. I guess what was the original win condition of this segment? The goal, so to say. I'm curious. We'll think about it again after we see Natsuhiko's scenes. Although that probably won't change my opinion of the original way it played out, because that's Natsuhiko didn't have scenes in the original version of this, not to my knowledge. So we'll deal with that next time. Will be the conclusion of the Xtend episode and of this game overall.